Hello and welcome to Women Techmakers. This is the first of a series that we hope to send to you from Google Live. We started with a panel at Google I/O last year, right before the night before I/O. It was incredibly popular, and so we decided that we would expand the series. We want to talk to amazing women in our industry, and today we have Leslie Bradshaw. So before we start, my background is I've been at Google for almost 10 years, leading new business development and M&A. Today I'm a vice president over in the Google X team, and I'm joined by Betsy.
Hi, I'm Betsy. I've been at Google for about 4 years, and I'm on the public policy team, and I work on a variety of different policy issues. One of my favorite is how data can be used to transform the economy.
So one of our ideas with Women Techmakers is that there's an amazing number of women in our industry already and throughout the history of our industry who've had huge impact. And so we want to raise the visibility of them, even though we often are sort of frustrated by the percentages. You know, sometimes in teams we'll see 10, 20, or 30% women. But the women who are here are fierce, fabulous, and contributing a lot. And so our goal with this series is not only to highlight the astounding contributions they're making, but also encourage more people, men and women, to join the tech industry. So, okay, welcome, Leslie Bradshaw, our first guest.
Yes, the hot seat.
You are the president, COO, and co-founder of JESS3, the amazing data visualization company. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys do and what you're thinking about?
So what we do is really bring information to life, and I think not a day goes by that there's not another article about big data and big data problems and what are you doing with your data. And one of the most important things is not just only the analyzing and kind of algorithmic work around the data, but it's that final mile of the visual and making sure that people are engaging and being educated and absorbing the information. So we've really decided to specialize on that front end tip of the spear with data.
Mm-hmm. It would be fun, I think, to show people some of the things you guys have worked on. And when we were talking, preparing a little bit, you talked about the range of different kinds of products you guys do, whether they're full live or whether they're sort of more of a static traditional visualization. Do you want to kind of share a little bit of that?
Really a continuum. When you think of data visualization and you're in tech, you're thinking interactive, and that's probably the most dynamic, interesting kind of API-based data visualization. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have static, and that's what you'd see mostly on Mashable with infographics, and I think the stuff that's been put out there by the sports industry and financial industry for years. It's about telling stories with data. The Economist does a fantastic job of little spark lines and pie charts. And then in between, you have animation, and that's taking data, bringing it to life, moving it, but not necessarily making it interactive. And all three of them really follow a very similar process, and it's really, they're all, the only difference between them is that one gets animated and one gets coded, but all of them you still need to go through first thinking about what question do you want to answer. The second thing is what data do you have, and oftentimes we're working with user-generated content and the application programming interfaces provided by things like Foursquare and Twitter. But then there's also a lot of secondary data sets and areas where you can go to a McKinsey report or Pew, and you can look at that. We've done an incredible project in 2010 using the Voting Information Project, and the work that Google and Pew has pioneered in terms of geocoding all of the polling locations. Mm-hmm. So there's just amazing. At data.gov, there's a lot of sources of data out there, and then you need to analyze it and come up with some outcomes and some potential kind of logic that's going to power your system. And that's probably the hardest thing for people who aren't engineers to do and think about, because there's a lot of conditions, a lot of if-thens that you have to think ahead about. And I think most people want to just push a few buttons and then have things compare and then reconfigure themselves. I would say infographics are an easier lift, because that way you're able to kind of hit pause on the data, look at it, snapshot it, and then come out what we call is in the narrative phase. Mm-hmm. And just as if you're writing a paper in college, you need to have a thesis, supporting evidence, and a conclusion. And that's what we've done in both the static and the motion, whereas interactive, it's a shifting ground. The conclusion changes as the data change.
Let's show an example of something. I think possibly, we've been lucky to work with you guys. Tomorrow is the U.S. election for those of here in the U.S. Listening. There's a visualization we've done with the news and politics team at Google, actually, with you guys. And so I don't know if we can flip to that.
Yeah, we've been working closely with the Google politics team out in Washington, D.C. And what we've been doing is taking the search data and search interest around key kind of decisive moments, whether it's a debate and seeing at what point did what were search spikes, when people were looking up the word Biden and malarkey, or horses and bayonets. I mean, those were some of the search terms that were spiking during the debates. We were also very active during the primaries and looking at which candidates were surging in which states. And one of the things, and I know Google won't necessarily say this, but I'll go ahead and say it, it became very predictive of outcomes in states to see what, going in probably 3 to 7 days out, what states were interested in, what counties even were interested in which candidates were correlating very closely with the outcomes in those states. So it was a really exciting thing for us to be able to kind of watch this huge data set and to take something where Gallup normally would be, polling people by phone and, a certain kind of end sample, whereas Google, the sample is much larger and it's geographically has an integrity as far as who's searching for what. So a lot of the Google work, really excited about tomorrow, and we've been working with all you for about a year now. So
thank you.
Yeah.
And then maybe another example. Let's see, which one should we pop to? Do you want to talk about the Samsung?
Yeah, let's talk about the Samsung wall a little bit. What we've done at various live events, I think that's one place where user-generated content really spikes and the data set becomes interesting. And what we did with Samsung in both 2011 and again in 2012 at the South by Southwest Interactive Festival, and looked at what terms were trending, what startups were starting to surge, what panelists were getting the most chatter, and then of course the nightlife, which parties were the most popular, who was checking in where. And we're looking
really
a little
fun.
we're looking at the kind of outcome screens, but even going through our thinking and our process is what information is going to be important to that end user. You've got people walking around in badges and hungover, what kind of information do they need to know? Well, they need to know where the panels are, and if they're missing the panels or they're stuck in line, what's being said and being shared. And that was something that we really watched. It was at a point throughout the event that certain pieces of news were breaking. There was a rumor that CNN was going to buy Mashable, and all of a sudden our screen showed all of the people discussing it, and everybody's eyes just kind of glued to it as if it was the TV station. So we're always looking at live events, obviously politics, sporting events. We did a project around the NFL and Super Bowl 45 with Twitter, and just looked at ways that fans were excited and talking trash and going back and forth. And those are really the moments where the data spikes, and then things start getting interesting at that point.
Yeah, cool. A lot of what you're describing is sort of a new way of sociology, right? Sort of measuring what's happening in real time using all this data. And I think you were telling me as we were sort of preparing earlier that you had studied sociology a little bit in school. What was your path like to get from that to what is now a very data-intensive sort of role in life?
So I think when we all go to high school and college, there's probably about 5 jobs we can conceive of, right? There's an astronaut, a firefighter, a teacher, a lawyer, and I thought I was going to be a lawyer because I thought, that's what some of my family members do. That's what smart people do. Make some money, and you go into school, and then all of a sudden you get exposed most often to this liberal arts education, and you're just eating from the buffet of education and life, and I loved sociology and statistics, and then I'm over here and I'm learning about Western civilization. So there was a lot of courses that I took at the University of Chicago that just my mind was open, and it was cross-disciplinary, and it was just a lot of intellectual just cultivation, I guess, right? So you go through that, and then you graduate, and then you need to get a job. And at that point I said, okay, well, I've been an assistant paralegal at a few law firms back home. I guess I'll be a lawyer. I guess I'll go in that direction. And while there at my first law firm, it was at a moment when a lot of the phishing scandals and a lot of the domain name squatting was occurring, and I was helping track those violations. I would screenshot the source code, or I'd screenshot the domain name violation, pull up the trademark, and make a little file. And it started to dawn on me that there was this kind of cataclysmic shift as brands were coming online and as other people were exploiting brands, that there was something to the digital brand management. And I think that's really where I started saying, okay, they're golden in their hills. And not that I was early to say that, because it was 2005 and .com had already come through, but it was starting to impact brands in a way that I think forever changed the way they approach their brand management.
Almost like a pure digital agency, which is where you guys, as a team came. In fact, to the level where, as you started, I think everybody was in different cities. Is that true? So
with JESS3, what we were starting to realize is, working at traditional agencies, working in law firms, there was just a lack of grabbing onto this new frontier in a really holistic way. People were digitizing records and trying to kind of think about beyond email, but it wasn't happening fast enough for our liking. So my business partner and I, we were 24 at the time, and he was doing a lot of freelance work, and I was kind of getting a little bit bored filing papers and screenshotting source code all day. So we started building out a bit of a company that we decided we weren't going to draw specifically from our geography, but we were going to use the internet to find the best talent. And at the time, most people would put their portfolio work on Flickr, but over the years, now you have things like Behance and Dribbble and Forest, and we were able to identify kind of the best in class. And going to blogs like Infosthetics and Information is Beautiful, you see whose work is featured, and you say, I mean, everybody has a rate. We were able to even work with Nicholas Feltron, who's now at Facebook, and we worked with him on an infographic years ago because we just reached out and said, hey, we love your work, and we had a project and collaborated a little bit with him.
It's a great best practice for in visualization. You can see amazing work and then go get
it is. It's a very very transparent industry, and every once in a while you'll get someone who puts a portfolio piece up that they were one team member of a larger team, but by and large it's kind of what you see is what you get.
You had people from Poland, from you guys were in DC.
We were in Washington DC, and in a lot of ways, I thought of us less as an agency and more as there was almost kind of this supply chain management that was going on, because I'd wake up at a certain time and I would check in with people that were producing graphics, and then I'd have to check in with the animators who were in a different city, and it was a lot of coordination. And I would definitely say that the cloud played a huge part in even being able to conceive that we were able to do it. But I will also say that there has been so many times that when we all come together and work together, we do a Google War Room every time we have an event, and that's when it's more efficient. And it certainly there's a lot to be said about the cloud, but the human interaction, I've come to really appreciate it in the last year or so.
You guys have explosive growth. Like I don't know, you're the things that Fast Company Inc. Everybody's saying you guys are it's an amazing story. And so it's sort of, I don't know if you can talk a little bit about the fly the plane and build the plane at the same time kind of experience you guys have been going through.
As I noted, it started with my partner and I, and then we had a couple of freelancers, and we were throttling between doing work for local businesses and doing logos and that kind of work, and we were stretching at the same time because we saw this user-generated content opportunity we were leveraging. Originally, Delicious and Flickr had good APIs, and then eventually Twitter came online, and of course Facebook opened their platform. So we really decided, first and foremost, let's specialize. Let's specialize in data visualization, and let's go a step further and let's even specialize in social media data visualization. And it's kind of like betting on the right horse, because those things were kind of up and to the right. And as those user bases got larger and the volume and the velocity of their content got bigger, there were brands who wanted to take that and make sense of it. There were people who wanted business intelligence and insights off of it. So that really was a big part of our explosive growth, was the specialization and capitalizing off of the proliferation of APIs. The second thing about the growth is that it really came down to just really trusting and going after what we knew was the right thing. Unlike startups and products, we don't have any venture funding, right? So this is 100% bootstrapped, cash flow management, kitchen table business. Hope we make payroll, hope that check comes in on time. But in a way, you have these amazing brands like Google and Red Bull and NASA underwriting your experimentation. So we did a lot of prototyping in the early days, and sometimes, one big piece of advice I always love to give is don't wait for a client to pay you. Take some of those profits and reinvest. And I think that some of our projects, like the I Voted project, where we did the first kind of visual real-time civic participation. We also did another project called the Geosocial Universe, a very simple graphic that just showed the enormity of mobile versus some of the more kind of Lilliputian GoWallet at the time and Foursquare. And those are things that are proofs of concept that later turned into lead generation and kind of proved out something that we knew that we could do, but nobody was yet paying us to do it.
Almost like how you found some of your artists.
Exactly. Yes, it's kind of, you've got to chum the water a little bit and then get people to think in the way that you know that you can deliver on. A really actually amazing kind of Google, our first Google project came about because we made a video called The State of the Internet. And at the time we had never done a video, and we were going to a lot of lectures in local universities and just talking about the growth of the internet was being driven by social media, and social media is something that is very flexible and everybody can get involved, and we wanted to show that. And we did usually through a few slides, but we said, you know what, we're going to do a video. So we put this video out, and lo and behold, big surprise, it goes viral on the internet, right? A video about the internet goes viral on the internet. It's very meta. And we got a call from Google and the Google Translate team, and they were looking for a motion graphics team, and they had seen our video, and little did they know it was the only video we'd ever done at that point. But fake it till you make it, and it turned into a project where we did the official About video for the Translate team, and it was a lot of fun.
Cool. You said you were only 24 when you started this whole venture.
Yes.
And you and your partner Jessie are now sort of in the first generation of leaders in this space. Where do you see this interactive space going, and where do you want to take it?
So one thing I see, companies that are being founded today, there's not a clear line of, oh, it's a service business or it's a product business. I think terms like creative technologists are emerging. People are hiring data scientists that are not just at Oracle, but anybody who's trying to analyze metrics and make kind of mission critical decisions. So I would say there's a fusion between kind of the art of marketing and the science of technology in Silicon Valley. And what we've said of our firm, we want to fuse Madison Avenue and Silicon Valley. Now we're based in Los Angeles, and we also want to fuse Hollywood in there. So we're kind of throwing all three together. But I don't think we're the only ones. I think there's a lot of other companies who are looking at the proliferation of content and trying to make sense of it and put it in a way that is discernible and digestible, and at the same time looking for ways to storytell and looking for ways to engage people and then also monetize it and add some kind of layer of payment and the ability to kind of keep growing. So I would say by and large it's a fusion of art and science, and where we want to take it is just through those three doors. We want to continue to work with the Madison Avenue brands and help them storytell, but at the same time we want to have our own prototyping and products division where we're taking some of our learnings while we're processing all of this data and thinking about, well, gosh, if every client comes to us every year around the Oscars or the Olympics or there's a product here, right? There's a way to visualize that. And I think there's certainly some smart folks getting into the space and specializing only in that. You have somebody like a Mass Relevance or on the business intelligence side, Radian 6 or Crimson Hexagon. But nobody's specializing specifically in the design of it. Whenever they close a round of funding, they always say, oh, we're hiring 60 engineers, but you don't really hear them talk a lot about UI designers or graphic artists. And I think that's where we've really differentiated and also partnered with firms that specialize more on that back end.
It's really important because visualization is a way, it sort of reminds me some of the greatest change comes from storytelling. You may have the data, but until you storytell well around it, nobody really gets the point, or they don't see how it connects to them, or there's no sort of call to action. And so you guys are the visual form of that in a really interesting way. Another example that might be fun to show or great to show would be the one that you guys did with American Express. In fact, that's a static version, but it has to do with sort of change for women in business. This is one, of course, near and dear to my heart, near and dear, I'm sure, to the audience as well. But American Express did a great job of pulling a lot of data out of the census report in 2010 and looked at a lot of the small business growth and just how women were driving growth, and I think it was 7 out of 13 major categories, and the economic impact of women-owned businesses. Now they released a report in the spring, but then, and a lot of people picked it up more just kind of based on some of the factoids, but they thought there's a longer shelf life to this. So we ended up creating 90 pieces of content with them. Wow. One is a large infographic that shows just kind of the overall path from starting a company to kind of the growth and the kind of macroeconomic impact. And then what we did is we worked with individual entrepreneurs and we asked them questions. This is the one? Yeah, this is the one. So it is, your business, your goals, your journey. And then we worked with individual entrepreneurs who would tell their story. So there was a kind of storytelling through data, and then there was more of a qualitative storytelling through the women who were doing this themselves. And we use some terms, we call it socially optimized content. Now, an infographic, when you look at some of those scrolling ones and you try to put on your G+ page or your Facebook page, they become really hard to read. Right. So what we've done is we kind of optimize it for the particular dimensions on the platform. So we create kind of snackable graphics. Yeah. So it kind of cracks open or kind of in a fractal way, takes a big infographic and maybe makes 10 smaller graphics out of it. So part of the 90 pieces of content, one was this anchored mega infographic
super graphic, which would Edward Tufte would call it. And then we had a lot of other kind of snackable pieces that were easier to share, easier to see on your mobile, easier to share on social, put on Tumblr, that kind of thing.
It's a huge contribution. I was able, for a little while at Google, I led kind of a transition of Google.org where we added more engineering, like Google Crisis Response and outreach to nonprofits. And one of my observations in that particular space is that people are doing amazing work, but the end product when they're communicating is often a very thick journal or written document that a subset of people have sort of maybe the background to read that, or less people are able to read that just because they're busy. So being able to do things like this, sort of synthesize the data and then put it into a visual form is really, I think, a high contribution and an important skill on a 21st century scale.
You were talking a little bit earlier today about, sort of saying, have you measured this on decision making? And you were saying, actually, no, you've measured it on consumption, which is pretty interesting. So you find that people are actually consuming this information when it's in graphic form.
Anecdotally, I can say one of our clients, Nike, we do a lot of reporting on growth of their social platforms and how social is kind of driving to their commerce site. And we were originally delivering this, and we'd load it up in Google Docs, and then we'd export it as a PDF, and it was a written document. And it seemed kind of counterintuitive because here we are a visual storytelling firm and we're delivering this Word doc. And so what we ended up doing is turning that information into an infographic. So every week we produce an infographic for Nike. It's optimized for a keynote or PowerPoint slide, and it gives you just the facts, and it storytells with qualitative and quantitative information. And I can tell you, everybody looks forward to that. It's something that the executives have on their desk. It's easier to kind of make an argument or have a discussion as opposed to having, as you said, a big kind of thick ream of paper. And I've written plenty of big, thick reports in my life, and I know that even the most considerate, intelligent people just do not have the time. And I think what information design does is it distills it down and really forces you to kind of get those potent nuggets in front of someone in a faster way.
Yeah.
One of my favorite projects, actually, thinking about a big ream of paper. So we had a 150-page white paper, and if we can pull it up, if you even just Google Economist and JESS3, it was a project where the Economist had put together a study of 113 countries and the global economic opportunity for women. And amazing project, and it was something that, again, near and dear to my heart, and it was The Economist, so they're, got great data, but it was a 150-page white paper. And you can just imagine there's probably like 8 people out there, 4 of which are working on a PhD and 4 of which are probably paid to read it. And they came to us and we animated it in a 6-minute piece. And it was incredibly powerful, and we just saw it just spread like wildfire online. And it distilled down 6 executive findings. It story told about the gap between policy and practice. And it really illustrated that in a very powerful way. And that convinced me immediately from here on out, anytime I have a report, it's either going to be animated or it's going to be designed in an infographic, because you could just see the audience, because it was presented at a forum, their World in 2011 series, and other people got up there and kind of showed your traditional slides, and people kind of checked out, but the video, you could just watch everyone's body posture and their eye contact. And so I think that consumption, again, I don't have the hard data, but qualitatively I've seen people really engage better with both video and infographic content. So I think it's a smart tool, whether it's an internal communication or whether you're doing any kind of consumer-facing communications. IBM's done a great job. I mean, think about their Smarter Planet, and that entire campaign is an icon, data-driven kind of thing, and that's where consumers are today. They are more educated. They are wanting to consume Wikipedia and IMDb while they're watching their favorite show, and brands are being smart to put that information at their fingertips.
Yeah, it's not just consumers. I think in the policy space, a lot of what you've talked about is sort of policy relevant, and certainly there's a lot of 150-page reports floating around out there about various different policy issues.
They're good, but they're like not the end product. They need to stop being the end product. We need the visualizations and then the social discussion after that to be more of the goal with the data behind it.
Right.
Real good data.
Yeah. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Good stuff.
So you have a regular a column on Forbes.com where you advocate for women getting more power seats. Tell us a little bit about why that's so important to you.
So I saw Sheryl Sandberg's TED Talk, TEDx Women, and she talked about there was a couple of staff members from George Bush's staff that gave up seats and kind of stood against the wall, and she kind of used that as this metaphor of more women need to take that seat at the table. And looking up quite a bit to Cheryl, I thought to myself, not only do they need to sit at the table, but they need to be at the head of the table. And there's the idea of it's not just about more seats, but it's about more power seats. I think we're seeing parity in a lot of areas for women that weren't here 50 years ago. When you think about education, obtaining higher levels of education and master's degrees and law degrees, but it starts dropping off the further up the food chain you go. And so what I advocate for is that we don't want to see single and low double-digit numbers in Congress, in venture capital funding, in you name it. Even the clergy, I looked up, and it was 15% of all clergy leadership are female. So seeing those numbers get closer to 50% is something that I hope to see in my lifetime across as many industries as possible.
One thing that's interesting is the president of Harvey Mudd College has been working hard on computer science, because computer science for a very long time has been 10 to 20% women in the field, which doesn't make sense given the impact and the fun and what's out there. But she was studying how the entry point into that particular major is somehow not of interest to women at scale. And so she made 3 changes. One of them was to take the freshmen to the Grace Hopper celebration on women in computing, which is where 4,000 women get together who are computer scientists at all levels, from senior fellows to new undergrads. So they could see women in the field. The second thing that they did was change the class entry point, so that instead of straight into programming, they actually did things that showed you what this field is about and challenge projects, and then get into programming, which was really important. And they also did a little bit of rework on the attitude in the class, and they had people, instead of sort of, let me prove to you how I can code, it was more like, hey, if you're really good, why don't you prove how well you can help other people and turn people into more mentor peers, with sort of the rock star programmers. And they're at 42% women after 3 years in the computer science department, which is really exciting. Yeah. So it's really, I think, in a lot of ways, showing people how exciting these careers are and how fun they are, and whether you're coding or whether you're in the core team, because all of the tech teams are really cross-functional teams of writers and visualization and artists and people who keep the trains running on time and people who run the back end of the systems, front end, etc. So helping people see a way into that, because there are so many jobs in our fields, and it's exciting to see finally when there's a few bright spots, because it is pretty daunting. The numbers are daunting.
The numbers are daunting, but I love this idea of different entry points. I think one thing people often say, there's not enough female technical people to found companies, and I'm looking for a technical founder, and I think it's not the right question to be asking, is whether or not you're that hardcore inner computer science person. But there's other things that can bring you to that table. There's people that can do interaction design. There are people that can do the operational side of things, people that do the HR piece of it. I mean, it all needs to come together, and certainly when you look at those numbers, I think the number is more than just 20 to 30%, but probably expands closer to kind of that 50% that we'd want it to be. And I look at my own company and the way that the gender makeup, and it's about 50-50. And we've had women, we've had female programmers. Our head of information design is a woman, and she's based in England, Tiffany Gonzalez, and we've had interactive designers that are women. And it doesn't have to be that kind of, again, that hardcore. I think when you think of somebody in their basement programming, or eating Cheetos and drinking Mountain Dew or Red Bull or something like that, I think that's kind of that default stereotype. But I think there's a lot of other entry points, and I love that the program that it sounds like Harvey.
You can eventually get to be the Cheeto eating programmer in the basement, but not right away on the path. You talk a little bit about school, because I think one of the other things with women coming into technology, having confidence and in yourself could be an issue. You said you actually have been an entrepreneur for a long time. You guys have a family farm. How is that?
So one thing I would say about my upbringing is I've looked a lot to my father and his entrepreneurial self, and he didn't even go to college, and just kind of started working his way up through various jobs, and eventually went from being a ski lift operator in Lake Tahoe to being a general manager after 13 years. So I saw my father go to work early in the morning, late at night, take any shift he could get, and just learn every aspect of the business. So that in my mind was like, okay, that's how you do it. All right, learn every aspect of the business and work your way up. I think my parents also instilled a lot of confidence in me, and I have a younger sister, so it's just us girls, and it wasn't oh, boys do certain things, girls do certain things. You know, we were always very active outdoors, and I loved science and math and went to science and math camp and econ camp, and that was always encouraged. So I never had a lack of confidence, and probably could be said at certain points I probably have a little bit too much confidence. So I think each personality is going to develop differently. There's probably men out there with less confidence and the women that are overconfident. But in general, I think women tend to put themselves second, and they, whether they're sisters or mothers or daughters, they're always in this role of making sure everyone's okay. And when you make sure everyone's okay, sometimes you kind of take that foot off the gas pedal, again, to use some Sheryl Sandberg language, and talking about not stepping up and saying, yes, I'll take that opportunity. But you know what? Oh, you know, Frank, he's been working hard. Let's let Frank have this one, or giving the credit, kind of further distributing it. And I think that those are some really great traits of the female gender, but at the same time, they are inhibiting oftentimes the advancement and putting women further at the top.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about you were accepted to University of Chicago and to Davis, and you decided not to go to Chicago. Say a little bit about that.
So here I am. I graduated from a rural high school in Junction City, Oregon, and I was valedictorian, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go make my way in the world, and I was touring a couple different schools, among them Davis and Chicago, and I went to Chicago, and all of the students had already read all the texts that they were discussing in the classes. They had gone to private schools, and I had no concept of this, but they actually paid as much to go to high school as I was about to pay to go to college, and it just completely blew my mind, and it was intimidating. Honestly, it was very intimidating. And then I was offered a full ride scholarship to UC Davis, and because I'd grown up in Northern California and Oregon, I had family members in Sacramento and around the area, I thought, okay, I'll go there. And I'll tell you, 2 weeks in, I knew I made the wrong choice, because Davis is a wonderful place, great school, really enjoyed the professors, but it was really large, and people weren't going there for academic inquiry at the volume. It was kind of more of a default, like, oh, I did pretty well in high school, I'm going to matriculate to this school. Whereas Chicago, highly self-selecting. You're on the south side of Chicago, it's cold, the school is hard, you have to take a lot of math. And I decided to reapply. And at that point, when I reapplied, I was talking with the counselor, and he said to me, Leslie, you didn't just get in once, but you got in twice. So you do deserve to be here, and I hope you remember that for the rest of your time. So I ended up graduating top 2% of my class, and went to every single lecture, did not miss a single beat, because it was, you know, if you didn't, you know, everybody else would kind of lap you. So it was a really competitive environment, but it was also really kind of nerdy and fun, and being smart was cool, and I loved that.
So I think it's telling, like, you've done this amazing thing, but to have a moment where sort of confidence is taking you in a different direction, and is important. I think that happens to a lot of women and men, and it's important to note that that's a pretty normal experience, and then you get back up and go. Yes. And just keep going.
I mean, the one secret to my success at JESS3, and now looking back at the last 30 years of my life, it's perseverance. It's discipline, it's showing up every single day, and there were so many points throughout the last 6 years that it would have been so easy to walk away, because things got stressful, you know, people quit, project didn't go as well as we'd like it to. But I also knew that there was more to come, and if we just kept showing up, I knew that if I kept showing up and putting my best in, and showed that to the rest of the team, then we could make it. And there's certainly, you know, we've had a couple of really great awards. You had mentioned we made the Inc. 500 this year at number 430 with our growth, and that took every ounce of me, every blood, sweat, tears. It's only been in the last few months that I'm starting to sleep regular hours again, but for 6 years, and for 3 of those years, mind you, I had a full-time job. So I was coming home, eating dinner, rallying, working from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., collapsing, rallying again, getting back up and going to my other job, and did that straight for 3 years until we finally had enough money and potential to make that bigger leap. So there's certainly, again, lots of times that you could have just folded up and walked away, but showing up every day as I did, whether it's at University of Chicago or with JESS3, it's just giving it 110%.
Yeah, showing up in the place you want to be and going for it.
Yeah.
And you guys, I mean, you're at over $5 million in revenue at this point, which is just amazing.
Yes, when I look back and I add up every single year, which I do sometimes, we've officially crossed the $10 million mark, which is really just a big number in my mind. I can hardly even think about it, but it's every little check, you know, every little moment, you know, kind of collected all in one place. And this year, due in large part to amazing partnerships with clients like American Express, and we talked about Google and Samsung. Another one that we've worked with over the years is Intel, and it doesn't get more Silicon Valley than being able to work with the chip maker that made it all possible. So it's been fantastic, and to have the trust of those brands, and they're coming to us for really fun prototyping, experimental work, and they're looking to us to kind of help them think through I always think of us almost as like the Navy SEALs, or kind of dropping out of a black helicopter and kind of solving something and then kind of zip cording back up.
And then it goes on.
Yeah, it keeps going.
We've talked a lot about your distributed team. How do you think that leadership, how do you change your leadership style to adapt to what sounds like is a very distributed global team around the world?
So one of the things that I always try to do is have as much face time as possible, and oftentimes that face time comes in the form of a Skype session or a Google Hangout. Oftentimes our information design director is logging on just as I'm logging off, and I'll grab her on IM and say, "Hey Tiff, let's just catch up." And at that point, I always like to hear from everyone and just say, what are you working on? Any roadblocks, anything that you're bumping up against. I think also we typically do 1 to 2 summits a year where we bring everyone together as much as we can from all over, and that's an opportunity to break bread together and to finally work together in the same room on a whiteboard, and that's incredibly important. But also, making sure that we're constantly celebrating wins as a team, and whether that's through our blog or tweeting it or sending around emails, there's a kind of a constant flow of discussion groups that are going on. And then we have a couple of other distribution lists and list groups within the company. We have ladies at JESS3, and so all we send around links when like the Anne Marie Slaughter piece came out in the Atlantic, or just different things that we want to kind of rally around, and we certainly make sure to just reinforce contributions from, this person did this, and shout everybody out, because sometimes you've never met the person, or people don't know who's working on everything, because even though it's a small team of about 30 full-time, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of contractors worldwide that are contributing, and to be able to pull everybody in is tough, but we've managed to do it.
There's a couple questions on moderator. So let's see. DBR in San Francisco wants to know, how do you balance growing headcount to be able to take on more work with growing cash flow to make pay? How do you balance that? And he or she is also saying, how have the clients of JESS3 changed over time? And how's the folks of the work? So maybe those are a little bit related in some ways.
So in terms of headcount, one thing we've always done is it's been mostly contractor, and we'll do kind of a permalance, or someone who is permanently part of the team, but you don't bring on as that full-time employee with benefits. And that model has been incredibly successful for us, because then we're able to kind of throttle up and down, and it's known by both ends that it may be that way.
Right.
So first and foremost, relying more on contractors, less on full-time headcount. The second thing, as far as the ways that the clients have changed over the years, we did Busboys and Poets, their logo, helped with their mural in Washington, D.C., a really just amazing restaurant, and entrepreneur, Andy Shalal. And that was one of Jesse's first clients, and he built the entire website on Blogger, and designed it all himself and hacked it together, because he's not a programmer per se, but he's a designer, and he figured it out. And we would still have that client while we started picking up clients like Nestle and Pfizer, and we started working, kind of bridging with having agencies do overflow. So we would get hired by agencies to work on sub kind of contractor basis. And I will say, it was a painful process to go from the small business servicing, because we had a price point that we could make a little bit of money, and at the time it was just subsidizing. I mean, Jesse and I both had full-time jobs, and at that point it was just kind of mad money to go on vacation or something. But what happened when we both quit our jobs and all of a sudden we had a few employees, it got real, and the pricing needed to get real to reflect that. And our previous clients that we were still servicing at a certain price point, it wasn't working, and so we had to, I guess the term might be, fire clients or have that tough conversation. And that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in this position in 6 years, is no longer work with certain clients because they had an expectation of a price, but in order for me to cover overhead full time and also our talent pool, we just kept trying to increase the kind of people we were bringing in. So the price of their time went up. So then we had to pass that on to the customer. So that was a difficult transition. And I would say that all occurred probably about 2010. Wow. And by 2011 and 2012, we've been 100% direct to brand, no agency overflow work, and been able to keep our pricing consistent so that there aren't those tough conversations again.
Right. That's anyone go there,
No,
go
we'll
here.
go
We have a
to
couple more over
Myra.
here. Let's see. So someone interested in getting to, it doesn't say from where, for someone who's just starting out in tech, how do I get into information design? Where would you start?
Well, I would definitely start with being comfortable with wireframing, and I wireframe on a whiteboard. I often take photos of things that I've sketched out, but just being comfortable with drawing and using Adobe Illustrator is also what our information architects use. It doesn't have to be high fidelity in the way that if you see some really elaborate UX work that a web designer might do, but having the wireframing and the drawing skill is incredibly important. The second thing to be thinking about is start looking at what kind of data sets are available and start thinking about how you might pair them. One thing we did with Google during the primaries is we would take a Gallup data set, then we would take a CNN poll, we would take the exit actual outcome, and then we would take Google search data, and just being able to look at multiple types of data and be able to kind of story tell. So start thinking about data and information, but then also find a way to draw and think through kind of some sketching. And Edward Tufte, I would say, he does a great course 3 times a year throughout the country. Try to take one of his courses. They're pretty theoretical, but I think it starts getting your mind thinking about it. And it's not as intimidating as it sounds. You really can have that lo-fi wireframing process, and then you can hand it off to someone else on the design line, and they can kind of bring it to life and do some of the more beautiful, kind of sexy visualization things.
Do you find that people on your team make that transition from starting out with wireframing? How hard a transition is that to make from, I don't really know what I'm doing, I'm going to learn how to do this first easy thing, and then sort of get into the harder, more technical roles over time?
I would say we have a lot of people coming in who have a strong background in research and analysis. We've had people that are history majors who are former reporters, so they understand how to storytell. And all they need to do is partner with the next person sitting, kind of along the continuum. In this case, it's Tiffany, and be able to work with her to interpret that. And she's as much a designer as she is a strategist. So it's kind of a fusion of the two. I would say her role is that linchpin, and then the next one down the line is that kind of creative artist who may not have any concept or any mathematical or statistical background, but they're really good at making things look beautiful. And having the wireframe gives them some parameters and helps them understand the relationship between data. I think one thing that we did early on was institute the wireframe in our infographic and even our storyboard process, whereas we see a lot of people, and if you've seen a bad infographic, this is probably what they did. They had an idea and some information, and then they designed it. Just went straight to graphic color, and they skipped over that process. And I think that's an incredibly important process, because that's when you work out the kinks of, well, does this make sense, and am I really telling a story, or am I just making it look good?
Why are you doing this? What's the goal?
Exactly.
What are you trying to visualize? There's two questions here that are related to something you guys were talking about before. One is sort of talking about how companies can involve more women and starting early ages, but also talking about biggest challenges in social in 2013. I actually think that part of one of the answers has to, you were talking about, you guys are both doing big data, you're doing visualization. There are a lot of jobs that people predict. We need data scientists, we need visualization, we need people. And in some ways, these kinds of jobs as an enticement to young people, young men, and also sort of as a social challenge, just being able to see in big data. I don't know if you guys would talk a little bit about it. I forget the number of jobs that it's predicted are going to be in this area, but it's, thousands and thousands, millions of jobs that we need to get ready for. And like the beginning of computer science, probably most of the people coming to these jobs, won't, in terms of computer science, people didn't have computer science degrees because the departments weren't there yet, and so people came from math and economics and art and whatever, engineering. And so in the same way for data visualization, other places, they're going to come from all over. So it's a huge opportunity for people for career growth if they're interested. So I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit.
Well, I would have loved some encouragement from the teachers who saw that I loved math, and then I was really good at Latin, which is a big kind of formulaic system, and there's a great program going on in England called Code is the New Latin. And before it was, I remember my parents always saying, like, you need to learn Latin, and that was what you were supposed to do to understand root language and be successful in business and medical and legal and fields and all the but you think about now shifting that perception of before it was all about going into, let's say, law, if you were, going back to our original 5 potential vocations as a child, and making engineer a really, engineer, statistician, data scientist, making that a part of that choice set and educating students, not just at the college level, but really as they're coming up and showing them what that looks like. And I think that could be a big disconnect potentially between classrooms that are still teaching to, kind of some pretty basic vocational roles to teaching to the future, and encouraging anybody with proclivity in math or a fascination with science or numbers, that they can parlay that into a very important field that, as you said, the jobs abound.
It's interesting because it's sort of like the makers, kind of the makers movement meeting sort of design thinking. So vocation, ability to make things, but also think about how to transform or invent or build. Sort of fits. It's interesting. There's an article in Technology Review this month, just a one-page update from Nicholas Negroponte on the $100 laptop, the one laptop per child, and there's some Android tablets. I'm getting a phone call. Sorry. The Android tablets that are in Ethiopia right now, and with some kids who have no access to literacy and those kinds of things. But one of the things he said, I think there's 400,000 kids in Uruguay with OLPCs, and they all part of the curriculum. They're all programming. So this idea that all children, Sue Black in the UK, who's in the computer science field, is thinking that why shouldn't, as once you've learned to read in, say, 2nd or 3rd grade, we're teaching kids cooking and instruction, and that way why shouldn't we learn programming? It's an instruction, it's a form. And so you're starting to see that actually with the OLPC. So getting more coding and making into the schools, I think, will be critical.
Right, we learn, the quick brown fox jumps over the typing, and you think about all the different things that are systematic and coding among them, and the earlier that you can introduce that, and we do it with language, it's just another type of language, and it is in many ways the new Latin, because it is the universal thing upon which so much is based in the world. I like that a lot.
Well, we are, I think, at the end of our time. Leslie Bradshaw, thank you so much for joining us here at Google, and Betsy for joining me, and everybody out on the web, thank you for joining us, and look forward to, I think the series is going to go all week, and then we'll expand from there. Thanks.
Great.